Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Many people try to find ways that they can create more joy in their lives, trying to discover gifts and talents that seem hidden and dormant, and they want to be able to bring those out and share those with the world. You can do that now if you're willing to be who you are, and even if that's not what you've been taught, that right now is the time, you can find a way to do this through what is known as access consciousness. On the program today, we're going to be talking with a guest who has worked with many modalities, including being an elementary school teacher. She also began to learn many ways that she could find that she could create a practical change for herself and others in simple yet dynamic ways. It is known as access consciousness, and our guest joining us here on the program today is certified in this area, and she's going to be sharing this with you, the listeners. I'd like to welcome to the program Kathleen Connor. Kathleen, how are you today?
I'm great. It's sunny and beautiful here in Oregon. I went out for a walk, and I'm just so glad to be on the show today. So thanks for inviting me.
You bet. Now tell us what access consciousness is. How did you get started with something like this?
Great question. I'm one of those people that almost my whole life I've been a questioner and a wonderer, and just, I always think that there's more that's possible. So I got trained when in my back in my 20s. I did a bunch of personal development work with insight seminars and landmark education, and then I got into body work with body talk system and neuro-linguistic programming. So all of those provided some tools for me. But what was different for me about access consciousness is that it got to some of the root energy around judgment and how to create change in the area of judgment, like either judgment of myself or judgment of others. So it allowed me to kind of get to some of the base energy of that and change it so that it can just more naturally come from my own awareness instead of coming from judgment in my life. Does that make sense?
It seems to, sure.
Yeah, so Access Consciousness was founded more than 25 years ago by a man named Gary Douglas, and he's in his early 70s now, and he's still teaching classes and quite dynamic. But for me, how I first heard about it was at a Body, Mind, Spirit Expo in Portland, and I had some of the body work done on me, and I thought, well, that feels nice, but I didn't think all that much. It just felt nice and relaxing. And it wasn't until a friend of mine invited me to come to a class that I got more depth with it. But overall, what's different about it for me is that it includes both body work and educational classes. So you clear energy that is more like the cognitive stuff that your brain deals with, your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And you can clear energy out of your body, stuff that's stuck in your body. So it covered a lot more bases for me, and it's changed a lot for me overall.
Now, you were, as I was describing earlier, it's how different are you willing to be? Share about what that's all about. What are people really trying to do?
Yeah, that's great. The reason why I use that as my topic is that so many modalities try to teach you to use this particular technique or that particular technique. In Access Consciousness, the reason why it has that name is the tools are meant to be really practical and a way for you to actually access your own consciousness, like your own awareness, your own, tapping into your intuition, as some people might say, to be able to tell for yourself what works for you, because what works for somebody else might not work for you. But being willing to do that often has you be quite different than other people, because generally we're taught, and I know this because I'm a school teacher, we're taught to fit in and to do what everybody else is doing and kind of be a blueprint of the people around us so that we can be successful and fit in that way. And accessing your own consciousness sometimes really has you stand out in ways that you might feel kind of different, because you're choosing really what works for you, and you're choosing based on your own awareness, not based on anybody else's point of view. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, because what I was thinking about as you were describing being a grade school teacher, that, I tended to stand out quite a bit. It was just my way, I guess. And having been a child who actually pretty much went to a different school every year up through the 6th grade, I wasn't one of those who sat in the back of the class, hey, here's the new kid, and then, maybe a week later they just disappeared and everybody's wondering if they even remember, well, where did that person go? But I was more of an alpha personality, I guess. And it also tended to get me in a lot of trouble. So as I had described to people, I not only knew the first and last name of the principal and the vice principal, but I also knew all of their, next of kin as well. That's how much time I spent in the principal's office. And we've had many conversations on this program about, how people begin to, as they approach midlife, awaken. They say to themselves, I've been doing things the way I was told to do, from people such as my parents and perhaps even school. And I find that it just isn't working in my life. I'm very dissatisfied. I don't feel authentic or genuine. And so they begin to find these things, these practices like what we're talking about here today, to awaken that. And I say that I think the biggest problem seems to be this education we're supposed to be going through. That it seemed to have kind of, quelched that a lot. You know what I mean? To where we actually doubt ourselves about who we are as we're out there in life.
For sure. I know exactly what you mean. Not only because
So having an elementary school teacher, sorry to interrupt you, saying this is like, okay, well, we've been talking about this for a while.
Yes, for sure, because I think even a lot of teachers are very frustrated that school has become more and more not about creativity and expression of each individual's, unique talents and abilities, and much more about, can you pass this particular test, and how can we prepare you to pass this test, and can you, do what other people do and show it on a test, or show it some way. So I know a lot of teachers are frustrated as well, especially as we go into testing season in the spring, and we're looking at, giving a brand new test called Smarter Balanced, and it really can be discouraging. So when I'm at school, I do my best to get to know every child I work with, and some of them are quite challenging because I'm a special ed teacher, and many of the kids that get labeled attention deficit or autistic or learning disabled are those really quirky, often very bright children. So it's kind of ironic that they get labeled, in special ed as that way. So they're often very bright, but not in the way that a school system will measure it. So part of the reason why the Access tools were so handy for me, and for, I'd love to get it out there to more and more kids and parents, is that at a young age we already get all these judgments impelled at us, or points of view that we're supposed to be like this and we're supposed to be like this. That's the kinds of things we hold energetically in our body. That's kind of the beauty of some of the body work. And then also we end up having these conclusions and these judgments about ourselves, that we create our life from that instead of really creating our life from what our unique talents, gifts, abilities truly are. So yes, I would love to be one of those people that keeps creating change in schools and around the world on that topic.
Now, I understand that in Access Consciousness, and you sort of alluded to this earlier in the program, is that there's what is known as an energetic clearing statement.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's funny because the first speaker, first Access Consciousness facilitator that I heard speak, I thought, this is weird stuff. Because there's these words that they use that help get around the cognitive brain to clear energy. So this isn't the body work per se. This is more when they're working with your thoughts. But there's this energetic clearing statement, and how it goes is right, wrong, good, bad, pod, poc, all nine, shorts, boys, and beyond. So it sounds really, really funny. But each one of those words stands for something. Like pod stands for point of destruction, and poc stands for point of creation. But it has to do with energetically shifting something that's unconscious for you. So you don't even know you have a limitation in a particular area because it's just, you're not even aware of it, you know. So it helps you get around your cognitive brain and your usual thoughts to change things. There's actually, one more thing I can add to that is there's actually a web site where people can go and learn what those words mean, and it's called theclearingstatement.com. So how does it get any easier than that?
It doesn't. You know, I'm curious, though, with these statements and the work that you do, what kind of feelings or what do you notice in changes that you know, help you kind of feel, I guess, encouraged that this is actually doing something, that it works?
Yes. Yeah, so for me, when I came to my first class, I came with a lot of skepticism just because I had done a lot of things and they had changed some things in my life, but I still didn't see the kind of change I wanted. So I kind of came to my first bodywork class with this prove it to me kind of attitude. And so that was about 4 years ago now, I guess, approximately, that I started doing these classes. And since then, one big change for me is I'm making a lot more money and I'm traveling a lot more. So I'm still doing my school teacher job that brings in a certain amount of money, but not just because of doing the access classes, but changing my belief system around money has helped me receive money in lots of different ways. But I've traveled to Costa Rica twice. I've traveled around the U.S. doing classes. I went to Canada this past summer. And that's just not something I would have done in the past because of my particular belief set about money or spending money or not spending money. Mm. So money and travel have definitely opened up for me. Relationships have changed. I look at relationships a whole different way, and I could do a whole hour just on that topic, so let me just say that relationships are just much more ease-filled sometimes for me if I use the tools. And my relationship with my body, communion with my body, and enjoying my body has changed for me in really sweet ways. So those are the main changes I've noticed.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about your beliefs there, as you were describing about your beliefs around money and how you were able to clear those beliefs that changed things for you. Now, what exactly were your beliefs, for instance, regarding money?
Well, let me say first, just so people know, because when I talked to Joy about doing this program, and I was so glad she said this, she said, make sure that I let people know tools that they can use right away. So I just want people to know that even though there's classes that you can pay to do, there's also all sorts of free videos and telecalls and that kind of thing online with Access Consciousness. And so if people contact me, I'll put you in connection with, like, ones that are clearing your beliefs about money or ones that are clearing your beliefs about your body. So I just want people to know that there's lots of free stuff out there so that they can choose that if they'd like. But back to your question about money and me, where, again, it's kind of a training of this culture, is that this culture values, I'll put it like this, intellectual property for money. So it's like where you're trained and where you have a degree is how you're supposed to receive your money. It's kind of one of the belief systems of this reality that I bought into. So even though I got trained in the body talk system and trained all the way up to master's level in neuro-linguistic programming, I never felt comfortable doing sessions with people and receiving money for that. Mm-hmm. I just had some beliefs about that, and I didn't even know that I did have certain things limiting that. I just knew that I wasn't choosing it. And it wasn't until I started doing the access classes and using the energetic clearing statement and clearing some stuff out of my body that I started choosing to do sessions with people. And part of that was using my own gifts, talents, abilities, like we were talking about earlier, and allowing myself to use those again. Because as a child, like we talked about, when I was aware of things and I said it out loud, sometimes I would get in trouble, you know. Or if I it was kind of my precocious self, like you were describing, if you're the person in the front of the class being silly, if I was kind of my precocious self, I would get in trouble, you know. So I kind of learned to shut a lot of that down and not be willing to be that with people in a way that can really contribute to the people around me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where one place where money started to open up much more for me. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't just receiving money for doing sessions and classes. It was receiving anything. Like sometimes I got a whole new bedroom furniture set just by asking for it and receiving it because somebody knew somebody who wanted to get rid of it. So it's just open up to receiving overall. Do you know what I mean by that, or do you want me to clarify that anymore?
No, I think I understand what you're talking about, because what I'm reminded of is a guest that I had on the program who was talking about how she went to do an Ayurvedic healing session.
Yes.
And it was very unique for her because she was so used to conventional doctors and Western medicine. She was thinking, how is anything like this going to actually make my life better? And she said as she participated in this, it actually bordered on the miraculous. And the biggest thing that really emerged for her as she described this particular experience was she discovered a belief inside of herself that she just didn't feel worthy or deserving. And you have to think about that for a minute, as you were describing perhaps your belief in a way that you weren't deserving of that gift or whatever it is, for instance, you were saying about charging clients, well, I think I should do this, for free or maybe not charge, or I feel, for instance, a certain sense of reserve that I shouldn't charge money for this. And I think so many people feel that way. I mean, look at people who are employed, and they say, that there's X amount, I can't remember the number, we'll say 60 or 70% of people who are working today are working for less than what they're worth, but they're okay with that. And then you can see how it starts entrainment with things like addiction. They get home after that Friday, work session is over with, and it's party through the weekend or find things to distract you, knowing that by the time Sunday comes, there's that dread of the Monday morning blues. And they're just in this constant cycle, and they don't realize if they could just take the time to liberate themselves, not only how freeing that is, but how much opportunity is truly out there for all of us. And there's plenty for everybody.
Yes. Yeah, and I would even say possibility, because part of what has been true for me, when you were talking about the Ayurvedic process, it reminded me that I didn't actually know until I did the Access Consciousness body classes that part of the reason why I have a body is my body's here to give me awareness. My body's here to let me know where I'm closed up, where I'm shut down, where I have limiting beliefs, right? And the more I unlock my body's like, hey, pay attention, hey, there's a possibility that you didn't consider, So my body is like a key factor in that, and that's what I think is unfortunate. A lot of the personal development stuff out there that's only about changing your thoughts is that if you don't include your body in embodiment, you're leaving a big piece of it out of the puzzle. You know what I mean? It's just, for me, once I started unlocking my body more and more, my body was really showing me its awareness, and that was so helpful.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, too, because I was just talking with a guest, I believe it was yesterday, and he says so many people spend so much time outside of or away from their body. And he says if they could just start being in their body, feel it, be aware of it. It's interesting that we're having this conversation today in light of the fact that Leonard Nimoy, who was known as Spock on that wonderful program Star Trek, that as we talk about this being in your body, I'm reminding of one of the original series episodes where there were these entities that actually took over. It was Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, and it was one of the female officers on the ship who was actually on temporary assigned duty, but they came into their bodies. Well, eventually Spock was the bad guy, and they had to find a way to banish that spirit because he was just corrupt and he was taking over the ship. And that being said, but they had to leave the bodies, but asked if they could just have one more moment, because here were these powerful entities, but yet they didn't know what it was like to be physical. You know? And I think a lot of us wander around like that. And unless we, cut ourselves or burn ourselves or bump that toe into a piece of wooden furniture at 5 o'clock in the morning, we're not in our body until we feel pain.
That's a great point, because I think even a lot of metaphysical teachings encourage you to get out of your body, unfortunately. Like some people, when they meditate, they leave their body and they're finally happy. But, but the thing is, what if the reason why we came back to be in bodies is to learn conscious embodiment? And conscious embodiment includes your body. So part of the definition of consciousness from an access consciousness point of view is that it includes everything and judges nothing. So that includes being in your body and having whatever awareness your body has. When I talked about receiving earlier, the body work, I mean, some people get this idea that it's more important to give than it is to receive. And there's no one, I mean, you can't really give to anyone if there's nobody out there willing to receive it, right?
Right.
So part of what we're learning, and that I really learned with the body work, is how to receive again. Receive all energy. Instead of labeling it positive or negative energy, just receive all energy, judge nothing, and just be aware of it. Yeah.
I think an interesting point on that, too, is how often have you been to a restaurant, perhaps with a friend or a few friends, and your server comes and brings you the bill, and all of a sudden there's an argument over who's going to pay it. And I would always take the position, if somebody's going to pay it, I just allow them, and I just say thank you. And I also encourage others to do the same thing. Can't you just say thank you? If somebody's willing to do this, just say thanks, that sort of a thing there. And if it's that important that you have to pay the bill, well, why don't you get with your host before they seat you and say, here's my card. When my bill comes, make sure it gets paid so there's no argument.
Yeah.
But, you can see that that's sort of the, what do we want to call that, conditioning, if you will, about what you're talking about, that belief in giving and receiving. The idea that they're paying the bill, and if you're going to take that away from them, there's an argument about the whole thing instead of just being grateful about it.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. I'm on your website now. It's accessconsciousness.com, and I see the clearing statement, and it's quite interesting what you have here. So I'm going to go ahead and read what I see in front of me, and then maybe you can, kind of expand on this a little bit. But it says right and wrong, good and bad, POD or pod, POC, all nine, shorts, boys, and beyonds. Now, that's an interesting sentence there. Tell us what's going on with that.
Yeah. Well, first, let me say that was over a number of years doing energetic work that they came up with that short speak, Gary Douglas, the founder, and then some of the other facilitators. It used to be even longer than that, but they kind of shortened it down, so it's like a little energetic power pack now. But when, like I mentioned, POD and POC stands for point of creation and point of destruction.
Okay.
So someplace, like let's say when you were a child in school, if a teacher told you something or another child told you something and you took it on as a belief, that's kind of the point of creation of something.
Okay.
So, and if you believe that you have more than one lifetime, you could have taken it on, a million years ago. But somewhere along the line, there's a point of creation of the energy that you're holding around something.
Okay.
And then also point of destruction, the POC part, means that there's times when you think, never again am I going to ever do this. Like let's say there was one lifetime when you were very wealthy, but your family got killed because of it. And you said, that's it, I'm never going to be rich again, or something like that,
Right.
So, and if you don't clear that energy to some degree, then you might keep working against yourself in terms of allowing yourself to receive money. The right and wrong and the good and bad, that is more around the Access Consciousness tools are set up to get you back to awareness. What we do instead is we either align and agree with something or resist and react, which keeps us in polarity. So we either align and agree, resist and react, and we bounce back and forth. It not only keeps us in polarity, but it keeps us justifying and defending, which keeps us in judgment. And if you're in polarity or judgment, it's almost impossible to be in your own awareness. Mm-hmm. So the right and wrong and good and bad part has to do with where we try to define everything as whether it's right or wrong, or whether it's good or bad, or whether it's positive or negative, that kind of thing, instead of going into our awareness and saying, what is this going to create in my life? What am I aware of here? And just really checking in. Because if somebody comes up to us and says, how come you did blah, blah, blah? Or if we react, we go to justifying and defending. If we want to be aware, we just kind of use our energetic awareness to go, what is it that they're needing or requiring from me here? What is it that I can say that can help shift or change this? Which is very different than going into justifying and defending or aligning and agreeing or resisting or reacting. So the good, bad, right, wrong has to do with that. Good, bad, right, wrong, all 9. Oh, all 9 is just 9 layers of things. Like I said on the web, the Access Consciousness website is not mine. That's the company's website. Okay. My website is exuberantlybeing.com. But the Access Consciousness website really goes into more of this, and the Clearing Statement website does as well. Okay. But there's 9 layers of energetic stuff, and so each different word has to do with what you can clear with those particular words. Mm-hmm. I would say overall, one of the key tools in Access Consciousness that is completely free, that you can use anytime, is asking questions about things that are not why questions. Why questions tend to get us back into our story about them, but questions, like simple questions, even like saying, how does this get any better? You've probably heard people say that, right? How does this get any better? Sometimes people will say, it can't get any better than this, but that usually shuts down the energy instead of allowing things that are even more amazing or even more phenomenal to show up in your life. So asking questions like, how does it get any better? What else is possible? Just those kind of energy opening questions. Right. Even just asking, what choice do I truly have? What am I grateful for today? What would it take for this to turn out far greater than I could imagine? And people might say, well, what's a question going to do that's going to change anything? But if you get yourself in question, you can usually pull yourself out of the conclusion you're in or the belief that you're in.
That's a great way to look at it, too, because what you're describing there is something that is very powerful. And I remember there was a time that I had read that your brain has been put into you to solve problems or just to solve things, whatever you want to call it. And it was said that if you don't give it something to resolve or solve, it's going to find things for you. Now, in describing what you're describing here today, as you begin to have these beliefs that are at the subconscious level manifest themselves in subtle ways, because it's said that we're pretty much driven 90% by our subconscious thinking, what we can't see or we're aware of. So imagine that you're out there and you're not doing much of anything. Then all of a sudden your mind says, I'm getting bored up here, so I'm going to find something for us to do because I need to solve a challenge. So what does it do? It does something by creating a challenge in your life that you just don't like too much. You could lose a job for all you know. Now all of a sudden your brain's happy because it's got something to solve. But you don't see it that way. But you don't see, for instance, that you were the one that really created that in the first place. Is that kind of an interesting way to look at it?
Well, that brings up a lot of good things to talk about. One is that a lot of modalities talk about changing your thoughts. And one of the primary things that I learned in Access that I know is not just like a tool in Access you people hear it everywhere, but they don't necessarily use it because they think it's so simple. They don't think it can change anything. But if you go for 3 days where every thought, feeling, and emotion that you notice coming up, if you ask, who does this belong to? And you don't have to have an answer. You just have to ask, who does this belong to, so that you get your awareness on the fact that probably, well, I can say from using this tool that more than 95% of your thoughts, feelings, and emotions don't actually belong to you.
Isn't that a well, no, I like that we're talking about this, because what you're saying is true, that there are a lot of modalities that say change your thinking, and I say, why not find out and go into why that thought arose in the first place? Because think about it again. If we're driven by our subconscious, our conscious mind just kind of shows us what's going on in front of us, and then we make the decisions based on that. But the subconscious brings up that thought, and sometimes you're totally being driven by that thought and the emotional power of that thought to make the decisions that you make, and they may not be so good. But what you're saying is that thought arises, say, who does this thought belong to, or where did this thought come from? It could be another question, but you're asking questions, and it's pretty interesting how this begins to unfold. It actually starts getting you more curious. Okay, what's going to come up next?
Yeah, well, the Who Does This Belong To tool doesn't just work for thoughts. It works for body pains.
Okay.
I had this time when I walked into another classroom at school, and I bent down to talk to this student, and I got this sharp pain in my knee. And most of us go into conclusion, I have a pain in my knee, it must be mine, right? But because I knew about these tools, I said, who does this belong to? And it lightened up the pain a little bit. Sometimes it doesn't change the pain when you ask. It just kind of brings awareness to it. But it lightened up the pain a little bit. And then I looked at who the teacher was. She had just gone through knee surgery.
Okay.
And I was just like, oh my gosh, our bodies are aware of other bodies around us. And so if you don't ask questions, often when you are feeling what you define as pain, what we call pain in this reality, often it's just an awareness of some kind. So that was the most fascinating thing to me, to realize that my body is aware of other people's bodies. And I have to say, well, thank you, body, for giving me that awareness, but can we dissipate that now and let it go? Because I didn't go through knee surgery, and and sure enough, in this case, the pain went away. But it's just fascinating to me that our bodies and we're kind of like psychic SpongeBobs. We're picking up everybody's thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and we're aware of their bodies. So if we know that, then we can be much more aware of what we choose and be conscious about it.
Now, have you worked with people directly to facilitate this work?
Yes.
And would you be able to share a story that you found fascinating as far as, I guess, transformation is concerned within a person who decided to participate?
Well, some of the ones that kind of surprised me the most, because I have this belief that the more I spend time with a person, the more I can change. And sometimes that's true. But when sometimes we do booths at the Body, Mind, Spirit Expo. There's one coming up in March. I won't be there because I will be doing a class in Venice, Italy. I've never been to Italy, so that's really exciting.
Wow, you cleared your belief about going to Italy.
Yes.
Well, one belief I can tell you is true is their pizza isn't the same in Italy as it is here in America.
Okay. That's good to know. Maybe I can eat the pizza then. But anyway, I was at a Body, Mind, Spirit Expo, and what we generally do at expos is we let people have sample bodywork sessions, so people can pay $20 for 20 minutes, and we run what are called the Access Consciousness bars. There's these bars of energy on the head, so we're just touching their head and releasing polarity points essentially on their head. And I had this belief that doing it for 20 minutes wouldn't really change very much for people. Mm-hmm. But at one of these expos, I worked with this woman for 20 minutes. I did body work on her, and I did some energetic clearing with the clearing statement that we were talking about. And she went on her way, but she took my card, and she called me back, and she was like, oh, my gosh, I have been in pain for like the last 10 years, and whatever you did at the Body, Mind, Spirit Expo, by the time I got home, so much of my pain was gone, and my attitude had changed about it so much that my husband was like, what did you do? You are not the same person.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shocked because, this body process that we do on people on the expo, people can learn this in one day. It takes you one day to learn it. It's not anything fancy, hard. Anybody can learn it in one day, unless they have really strong beliefs that they can't do it or whatever. If they get in their own way, of course, I can't help them. But it's a really simple thing. You give people a chart. You put your hands here. You put your hands here. It's a very simple thing that people can learn how to do. And I just did it for 20 minutes on this woman, and she got rid of 10 years worth of pain. So for me, that was one of the most, the one that stood out for me. But often at the Body, Mind, Spirit Expos, people will even come back to me and say, well, I'm not sure what that is, but I want to find out more about it because I just feel a lot more light in my body. I feel more comfortable, more ease-filled being around a lot of people. And so those kinds of things I hear regularly.
Mm-hmm.
Then when people come so I have one-day body classes. I have a half-a-day body class today after the radio show. And then I have classes that go up to 4 days that are more clearing your beliefs, not the bodywork classes, but sit-down classes. And they all produce different kinds of results.
I would think it would be just really interesting for a person to be involved with this, to take the classes or the workshops, just to discover what is inside of me that I'm not aware of. What drives me, for instance. It would be just really an interesting time or day, whatever, of just curiously seeing what arises inside of you and thinking, where did that come from? Interesting.
Well, I'll give you a sample of one of the questions that might be asked at an Access Consciousness class, and I'll use the energetic clearing statement so you can get a feel for what we might do. But in this question, pay attention to the word occupation, because that's one of the key words in terms of how we get distracted.
Mm-hmm.
But let me just come up with an example. So here's a question. So I ask a question that helps open up the energy, and then I say the clearing statement to help dissipate that. So the question is, what energy, space, and consciousness can you and your body be to live beyond the occupation of this reality? Anything that won't allow that, can you just try and uncreate it, please? Right, wrong, good, bad, pod, poc, all nine, shorts, boys, and beyond. So that's an example of a question that brings up energy and the clearing statement that helps clear it. Now, people might be worried that it's going to clear something that they don't want cleared. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
You only let go of that which is unconscious to you that you don't want to have anymore. And I can't take anything from somebody that they really would like to have. Mm-hmm. It's only, it's kind of like breaking down the house of cards that you've built up belief system-wise. So yeah, how does it get any better?
Well, that sounds interesting, that's for sure. Now, what about judgment and awareness? What are the differences between those two?
Oh, thank you for asking.
Well, now, think about how often we
actually
sit in judgment of something. It could be, boy, that person's an idiot. You don't even know who they are. You just happen to see them on the street and they hit you the wrong way, or just all those things that we find ourselves thinking all day long. I always found it would be funny if we could hook our brains up and record what we actually think all day long.
Yeah.
And realize, oh my goodness.
Well, that example that you gave was perfect, because if you're walking down the street and you get this hit, that person's an idiot, that could be a judgment or an awareness, honestly. And this is where it gets so tricky for people, because like we talked about, so much of our childhood with our parents and our schooling and everything else has taught us that we're supposed to use judgment, conclusions, discernment, decisions, debating, that kind of energy.
A lot of left brain stuff, right?
Yeah, and not even just what part of the brain it is, but like the energy that it is. Like the word decision, decide means kill off one option to pick the other one. And that really doesn't give you much freedom, So really when I talk about consciousness, I talk about true conscious choice when you're choosing something. So what I learned about judgment and awareness with Access is that when you're in judgment of you or somebody else, like we said before, you can't be in your own awareness because it gets in the way. So you got to be aware of the two. And sometimes when we, walking down the street and we think that person's an idiot, we assume that's a judgment. So that's where you go into a question. Is that a judgment or is that an awareness? And you got to get good about feeling what's light or heavy for you, like what's more expansive and what's more contracted. That's how I would say it. And if it feels light, that it's awareness, it might be your body or some part of your being picking up an energy of that might be a person that hanging out with them might not be the greatest idea.
Ah.
So we tend to think that something, quote, negative is a judgment, and it isn't necessarily true. Another example could be if you see somebody and you go, wow, that person's really fat. And then you judge yourself. You're like, why am I judging that person because they're fat, And then if you ask, is that a judgment or awareness? What I've found is if a person is carrying extra weight around and they're in judgment of themselves about it, I tend to be really aware. So I'm around them and I notice that contraction around their weight. Otherwise, I don't really have a big point of view about whether people have more weight on their body or not,
Okay, so see if I can be clear about this. I believe I am, but when you're talking about this moment, again, back to the person on the street who's an idiot, you say that person is an idiot, and then you ask the question, is this a judgment or an awareness? Now, if it's an awareness, you're saying, then you're going to feel light, so that's actually something that's them. You're aware of maybe how they think, or maybe it's not a good idea to hang around this person because maybe some choices will lead to disaster, who knows. But now a judgment, if it comes up as a judgment, you feel a heaviness in your body?
Yeah, it's something I had to kind of build a muscle for because
right.
so much of us are taught not to be in tune with our own awareness. So I had to keep asking my body and my being lots of questions and build an awareness around what's light and what's heavy for me.
Okay.
So you just have to play with that for a while and get a sense. I mean, most people already know whether they contract or expand around certain things, but still play with it because we have some conclusions.
Okay.
Like sometimes, even in this example, let's say, is that person an idiot and it's light? That it could be that things change every 10 seconds. Mm-hmm. So it could be if you meet that person 10 minutes later, that it's a different energy. It could be just at that particular time, it's a good time to stay away from them.
Okay. Now, what is the judgment then? Is that tell us about that one, because I think I understand the awareness seems more intuitive.
Judgment usually comes from some belief system we have about people are not supposed to be this way, or that back to that good, bad, right, wrong, that somehow we've judged them based on something they're doing or being that either we judge as bad or wrong, or we're not willing to be it. Mm-hmm. Like when I'm around a woman who's being really bitchy, sometimes I'm not willing to be that energy. Sometimes that energy is required to change things in the world, and I'm not always willing to be that energy because I was raised that you're supposed to be nice and supposed to be this and that, and sometimes I get walked on for that. So it's funny, but I'm working on my ability to be able to be, the energy of don't mess with me kind of energy that doesn't come natural for me because of how I was raised. But that is sometimes what's required to change energy around things. So even though you've asked the question about this particular person walking down the street, it could change. It could change a couple minutes later. It could change the next day.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure. I've found that I've had a time where I thought about somebody in a particular way and I didn't know them very well. And then as I got to know them, I realized, wow, you're much different than I thought you were.
Yeah.
That's usually always better.
Well, the thing is, I work with kids that are labeled autistic, and because I worked with them for years, now when I run across adults, like the what's the show on TV, Big Bang Theory, really makes fun of this. But there's, of course, a lot of adults out there that are on the spectrum of autism, and they're so easily misunderstood because they don't get a lot of the social nuances of how you're supposed to say things or what you're supposed to do or how to, they have difficulty with that. So there's people that I know that on first encounter, you might think that they're arrogant or that they're really shy, but it can be they just don't know how to interact with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you know people like that.
That makes a lot of sense, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff. I'm curious, as people are listening here, how they can find out where a facilitator might be in their area.
Yeah, so the accessconsciousness.com website that you talked about allows people to go on and look up a particular class, like if they're looking for a bodywork class, and look up a facilitator. So you can put in, I forget how many facilitators we have worldwide now, but over 300 I know, and Australia and Europe and India and just all over the place there's facilitators at this point. So you can put in the closest area to you and find out who is a facilitator. And in Access Consciousness, there's facilitators that have just learned the body work. So there's bars facilitators, and the bars are a certain kind of energetic body work. And then there's certified facilitators like myself, so I can teach the body work and the foundations level 1 classes and some intros and that kind of thing. So there's certain distinctions that way. But if you go on the website, you can find that out. And then there's also a separate website for Gary Douglas, the founder, and he often has some really interesting blogs going on his website. Probably the most well-known facilitator that travels around the world doing these classes is a man named Dr. Dane Heer, and Dane is spelled D-A-I-N, and Heer is H-E-E-R. He has a book out called Being You, Changing the World, and it has to do with the topics we were talking about earlier, where people have lost track of what their own gifts, talents, and abilities are. And, it's like the question that I put on this description for today is, what if the gifts, talents, and abilities that you have you're the only one that can bring them to the planet. So if you're not bringing what you have, then nobody else can bring what you have. So it gets you in touch with what are your abilities and talents and capacities that you can become aware of and that you now can contribute to the planet, that nobody else really can deliver that. You're the only one that can. You know what I mean? So Being You, Changing the World addresses that topic, but there's all sorts of books and telecalls that are in the shop at accessconsciousness.com, and there's lots of free, like one of my favorite ones to listen to, and they're an hour long, so they cover a lot, there's Google Hangouts by different Access Consciousness facilitators, but there's some Google Hangouts by Dane Heer, like ones on relationship and your body and asking you shall receive, or just some of the examples. So there's just a lot of stuff out there, but I encourage people, if they're local, if they're here in Oregon, and they want to know what's going on, to either email me at Kathleen@accessconsciousness.com or go onto my website and contact me that way. And I'm also on Facebook.
And your website again was?
ExuberantlyBeing.com.
Exuberantly Being. You got to love the enthusiasm of a title like that.
Yeah, if you can spell it, you can find it.
That's right. Or you can actually just type up Kathleen Connor, because I noticed that you pop up that way just as easily on Google. So.
Oh, cool. Okay. They spell my name right. Kathleen with a C, Connor with an O-R. They can
there
do it.
You go. Kathleen Connor, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. What a pleasure.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Have a great day.
You bet. So it's up to you, the listeners out there. If you want to feel that profound change and give to the world those special gifts that only you were meant to give, then perhaps Access Consciousness is something that you should consider pursuing. You can also find out more by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com, that is the number 50, and sign up for our free weekly e-news updates. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, live your day past halfway.